Chapter 425. What do you mean? Do you think I'm a mute? Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, the beef that is the most delicious for others is indeed delicious in Jiang Hai's mouth, but Jiang Hai doesn't lack these, so he usually eats freely. It doesn't matter if he eats less, but if he holds this anger in his heart and doesn't let it out, it will kill him. Of course not, we can't suffer in silence. But when she heard Jiang Hai's words, Qili spoke first. She now knows that Jiang Hai still doesn't fully trust her. If she stands in the wrong position, Jiang Hai will really leave. Although she is thinking for Jiang Hai, it seems that she has to consider Jiang Hai's inner thoughts. Then what do you think we should do? Looking at Qili in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a serious face. Seeing this, Qili waved to Master Zhang who was cooking. Master Zhang nodded politely and left first. At this time, although Jiang Hai doesn't fully trust all the people in this room, at least Qili does. At least if we want to do it, we have to plan how to kill him in one blow, how to deal with the next thing, who to find to do it. These are all things we need to consider. Looking at Jiang Hai, Qili said with a serious face. Leave this to me, I came here with the boss to do this job. Hearing Qili's words, Azalina slowly picked up a piece of beef in front of her, stuffed it into her mouth, and then said to Qili with a smile. You? Looking at Azalina, Qili couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Originally, she thought that Azalina was Jiang Hai's new lover, or like Penelope, a lawyer's assistant or something like that, but she didn't expect that she would actually say that she wanted to solve it. Let me introduce you, Azalina Vicabrio, former KGB agent, now my bodyguard. Looking at Qili's surprised look, Jiang Hai's heart calmed down a little. He picked up a piece of beef and ate it while talking. Excuse me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili couldn't help but hesitate, but she didn't expect Jiang Hai to have such an expert around him. It seems that Jiang Hai didn't come here casually, he came here prepared. Originally, she thought that Jiang Hai was so angry that he lost his head and directly came to fight with Zhangwu. It seems that he unknowingly received a very good team. The beauty in front of him turned out to be an agent that he only saw in the movies? So amazing. Since we have people, then we also need to prepare. Goodbye, we need to know the time and place of the attack. If possible, we need to uproot the Yin family once and for all. If only 1 or 2 people are caught, the rest will be on guard, then it will be difficult to deal with them. Looking at Azalina in front of her, Qili said slowly. Up to you. Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai shrugged his shoulders. Originally, according to what he said, they should directly break into their house and then exterminate their family. National Security Council? National Security Agency? Listening to this person's words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then said with a smile. Since the National Security Agency is here, will there be some Dragon Group, Phoenix Group and so on in a while? If these things really existed, Jiang Hai would have poisoned himself to death. How could he be so shameless? After all, this was a farming novel. Our country does not have a National Security Agency, only a Ministry of National Security. Our National Security Council is subordinate to the Ministry of National Security. I came to contact you this time to discuss with you about Mr. Du Feynman Weha Muhammad bin Radi al Maktoum. However, looking at Jiang Hai, the young man did not act too arrogantly and continued to speak. Sit. Originally, when he came in, Jiang Hai had already wanted to drive him away, but when he heard that he came to talk to him about Du Feynman, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little puzzled because he was really curious. What does Du Feynman have to do with him? Pointing to a position in the distance, Jiang Hai said to him. The man did not hesitate and walked in directly and sat in that position. As for Qili, she winked at the assistant who almost fell down. Although the assistant was very reluctant, she still stood up and closed the door. I came to Mr. Jiang this time mainly because I was assigned by my superiors to ask Mr. Jiang to do us a favor. After sitting down, the man did not say much and directly said to Jiang Hai. What do you mean? After eating another piece of beef, Jiang Hai said slowly. He was not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. At your level, I don't think I need to talk too much nonsense. Our country is short of oil, very short of oil, and the Middle East is an oil-producing area. But in recent years, the power of the United States and European countries in the Middle East has increased instead of decreased, which has made us very unlucky. So this time, Prince Du Feynman came here because the higher-ups want to get the oil supply from the Middle East through him. Seeing that Jiang Hai was not very patient to listen to him, the man quickly said. He now knew the situation in the country. Not to mention that Jiang Hai's foundation was not in the country. Even if it was in the country, young people nowadays would rarely pay attention to the imperial court if it was not for their own interests. You can say that these people are free or rebellious, but this is the reality now. The education of patriotism made the young people hate the Japanese, hate the Americans, hate the Koreans, hate the Indians, hate the Indonesian monkeys. But when they were really asked to contribute their property to the country, 99 out of 100 people would disagree. This was the selfishness of human beings. After all, it was not a few decades ago where everything could be sacrificed for a single sentence. Chapter 426. Tell me what you want. Looking at Jiang Hai's playful eyes, the young man couldn't help but frown. Sure enough, this guy wasn't easy to get along with. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, the young man knew that the imperial court would have to pay a price. However, the imperial court is not his. He just came here to ask Jiang Hai for help. As long as Jiang Hai is willing to help, the imperial court will pay some price. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, the young man said calmly, "It seems that the imperial court is not sincere. If I don't know anything, why would I send someone here? Let's talk about it when you think about what you can give me." Jiang Hai really doesn't know how to negotiate, but he is not stupid. It is not good for him to reveal his trump card too early, so he just smiled, then picked up the teacup in front of him. Since ancient times, Wuxia has a saying that the guest should be served with dishes and sent off. The only person here who can be regarded as a guest is this young man. This young man has naturally received professional training, so he naturally knows the reason why Jiang Hai did this, so he didn't say much. He stood up directly, nodded to Jiang Hai, and left the room. He just came here to convey the message of the higher-ups. The specific negotiation depends on Jiang Hai and their higher-ups. Jiang Hai, do you really want to agree with them? Seeing this person leave, Qi Li, who was sitting next to Jiang Hai, couldn't help but ask hesitantly. Based on her understanding of the imperial court, it was true that privately cooperating with the imperial court would earn some reputation, but other than reputation there was nothing else. It was inevitable that they would lose money. In the eyes of these merchants, money was much more useful than reputation. There is no such thing as agreeing or not. Let's see their sincerity. Anyway, my business is not in the country. We will talk about it when the time comes. This person is just a small fry. If I release my goodwill, there will probably be a big shot coming to talk to me tomorrow. This is also one of the opportunities to kill the Yin family. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "The main purpose of Jiang Hai's coming here is to kill the Yin family. If he makes it clear, the imperial court will naturally help him." Okay. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Qi Li hesitated for a moment, nodded, and then changed the topic. For her, there is nothing that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. Of course, if Jiang Hai can understand her intentions, it is indeed something that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. After the meal, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the hotel. As for Qi Li, she went home. Lying on the big bed in the hotel, Jiang Hai scrolled through the two numbers on his phone. Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunqian. To be honest, although they hadn't been gone for long and they kept in touch with each other on the phone and the internet, Jiang Hai missed them a little. After all, they were the only two women in the world who had confirmed their relationship with him. What? Aphrodite? Jiang Hai can only say that Aphrodite was an accident. He really didn't want to touch the girls around him. Now that they are in the capital, to be honest, Jiang Hai misses them even more. But after looking at it for a while, Jiang Hai put down the phone. If it was before he knew about the Yin family's power, Jiang Hai would call them, but now Jiang Hai has to consider more. For example, if they fail, how can they escape? Jiang Hai already regretted bringing Delina, Marian, and Penelope daily, not to mention adding more people. After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai patted his head and threw the phone aside. Let's talk about it after the matter here is over. After all, he flew for more than 10 hours and had to adjust to the jet lag. Jiang Hai was also a little tired. The next morning he didn't get up. Instead, he slept until 10 o'clock before he was awakened by a knock on the door. Wearing pajamas, he walked to the door in a daze. After opening the door, he found that the person who knocked on the door was none other than the staff of the Ministry of State Security who came to see him last night. Behind him, there was a middle-aged man in his 40s who looked very energetic. This middle-aged man was about 1.75 meters tall and looked very decent. He wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses and looked more like a scholar than a lackey of the imperial court. A government official. The first impression he gave was not bad. "Hello, Mr. Jiang, we meet again. This is my superior, Mr. Chao Weiqing. He has full authority to talk to you about the topic that we didn't finish last night." Looking at Jiang Hai, who opened the door, the young man here said with a serious face, "Yes, please come in." Looking at the two people in front of him, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and waved his hand, indicating that they could come in. The two people didn't say much and went straight in. They looked around the suite. Although they belong to the court, they usually don't have many opportunities to live in suites of this level. Especially the young man. After walking in, his eyes were still shining. He really didn't know how this Jiang Hai, who is about the same age as him, can live in such a good suite. Why is he still a small staff, but he can already live in such a good suite and become friends with a member of the Dubai royal family? Most importantly, he has such a beautiful wife, Chili. Yes, one night is enough for these people to investigate Jiang Hai's background. They all know that Jiang Hai is the supplier of beef to Chili's restaurant. At the same time, they also know that Jiang Hai is Chili's husband. Take a seat first. There is something to drink in the fridge. I just got up and need to wash up. Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and said casually. Then he walked into the bathroom in his room and started to wash up. This is the bad habit that Jiang Hai has developed after staying in the United States for a while. He doesn't treat his officials as leaders. After all, in the United States, a rich person like him is in the privileged class. Officials are nothing in front of him. For someone like him, he basically ignores the town mayor and the mayor. Of course, he is still very humble when it comes to the governor and the president. However, when his wealth accumulates to a certain extent, even the governor and the president need to see him to ask for political funds. Then, he can really do whatever he wants in the United States. As long as he doesn't do anything outrageous, no one will find trouble with him. Of course, this is all nonsense now. At present, he is only the richest man in Winthrop. However, this habit has already allowed him to ignore many officials in the country. This is completely different from last year at this time. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people on the other side were stunned. Then the young man's face showed a trace of displeasure. However, the middle-aged man didn't care. He still had a smile on his face as he looked at Jiang Hai's room. After about 10 minutes, Jiang Hai finished washing his face, brushing his teeth and washing his hair. He walked out of the room again. He casually sat in front of the two people and nodded at them. Seeing Jiang Hai sit down, the middle-aged man opposite him said with a smile, "Mr. Jiang, you are really young. Looking at the information, Mr. Jiang should be less than 30 years old. You are not even 30 years old, yet you have such a large family fortune. You are really a hero from a young age." He said this for a reason. Firstly, he wanted to flatter Jiang Hai. Secondly, he wanted to tell Jiang Hai that they have already investigated his situation. If Jiang Hai still wants to play some tricks, then there is no need to. I like to do things directly. I don't like our country's tradition of beating around the bush. I know that you represent the imperial court, so you must have already investigated my situation. I can also help the imperial court talk to Du Feynman about the oil and high-speed rail. However, I still want to ask the same question. What can the imperial court give me? Looking at Du Feynman in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and said faintly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the middle-aged man also looked at him seriously. Isn't serving the country a virtue that a Wuxia person should have? Why do you say that? After looking at him for about 10 seconds, the middle-aged man said slowly. It was obvious that he was ready to flatter Jiang Hai. Upon hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately waved his hand and said hurriedly, "Stop. If the imperial court is not sincere, then forget it." He wouldn't throw away the benefits that he got just because some people said a few words. Although he needed these people to do him a small favor and gather the family's people, he wouldn't give up the benefits that he deserved. Most importantly, he wanted to distance himself from the family's matter. That was the most important thing. Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man stretched out his hand to stop him and said slowly, "Brother Jiang, don't be too anxious. The imperial court represents a country. They definitely won't bow to anyone. Therefore, there are no conditions or sincerity. However, the imperial court can give you some help and compensation." Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man didn't know whether it was true or not. In fact, to put it bluntly, this was the art of Wuxia language. The imperial court wouldn't bow to anyone, any force, or any country. However, if you worked for the imperial court would definitely help you. It was just like being a civil servant and the imperial court would pay you a salary. The imperial court would always be high and mighty. Therefore, in other words, it depended on whether Jiang Hai wanted face or benefits. For Jiang Hai, face was more important than the sky. Therefore he chose benefits. Oh, then what is the imperial court's compensation and help? I'm curious. After sitting down again, Jiang Hai said calmly. The imperial court won't be of much help to you in the United States. I don't think you want the imperial court's shadow in your manner. This won't be good for you in the United States. If you are targeted by the United States government, then it will be troublesome. Therefore, the imperial court will mainly help you in China. I know you are selling things to China. The imperial court will give you the first advantage. That is, if you sell your things into China, you won't have to pay customs taxes. Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man said the first condition. However, Jiang Hai curled his lips when he heard this. What could he sell? How much customs tax could he get from selling beef? He was going for the high-end sales, not the volume. Chapter 427. Seeing Jiang Hai curl his lips slightly, the middle-aged man sighed in his heart. In fact, when he heard this condition, he couldn't help but be stunned. This was because he also knew that Jiang Hai was taking the quality route. His beef was mainly sold on the high-end route, not the quantity. 1,000 cows, even 10,000 cows, a cow can be slaughtered for a few hundred pounds of meat. 10,000 cows can be slaughtered for a few million pounds of meat. It was not a small amount, enough for a person to eat for a lifetime. But the problem was that there were 1.3 billion people in Wuxia. Millions of kilograms of beef was nothing in the market. Of course, it was very expensive as a whole. 1 kilogram was sold for 2,400 yuan, so millions of kilograms were worth 12 billion yuan in total. But according to the customs tax, the beef only had to pay more than 10 million yuan in customs tax. It was not easy to ask Jiang Hai to help with a customs tax of more than 10 million yuan. Don't worry. There is a second condition. We can exempt the cheese restaurant from business tax, urban construction tax, and individual income tax. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little impatient, the middle-aged man immediately said the second condition. Hearing this, Jiang Hai frowned more deeply. Because the Western restaurant of the cheese restaurant was built by Qi Li and all the money it earned belonged to her. But it had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He and Qi Li were not really a couple, so it had nothing to do with him. Seeing Jiang Hai frowning more deeply, the middle-aged man panicked. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not lack money for the first benefit. But for the second benefit, Jiang Hai should be very tempted. According to the current business situation of the cheese restaurant, the net profit every day was more than 2 million yuan. This year's turnover was 730 million yuan. According to the tax, the business tax was 5%, the urban construction tax was 7%, which was 12%. Plus the tax of 20%, although there was a reduction, 30% of the total would be tax. 730 million yuan meant 219 million yuan. This would save him a lot of money. Why did Jiang Hai still look reluctant? It was more than 30 million yuan in US dollars. In fact, he didn't know whether the money could be saved or not. Jiang Hai didn't intend to ask for it. It had nothing to do with him. Third, if the cheese restaurant and you have any projects in China in the future, we will give you the green light. Seeing that Jiang Hai was not tempted by the first two conditions, he said the third one. But the third condition made Jiang Hai speechless. His focus was mainly in Boston. What did the projects in China have to do with him? He didn't intend to invest his funds in China. After all, he had seen too many cases where money was wasted. If he put his money in the bank, he could live on the interest. If he put his money in China, what if he was targeted by the second generation? Who would he turn to for help? To be honest, I'm not interested in what you said. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai waved his hand, indicating that he should stop talking for the time being. To put it bluntly, these three conditions had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Then what does Brother Jiang mean? If there's anything you want, I'll pass it on to my boss. Hearing that Jiang Hai was not satisfied with these things, the middle-aged man in front of him couldn't help but be a little surprised. Was Jiang Hai going to ask for an exorbitant price? He had already said just now that this was the help and compensation from the imperial court. If Jiang Hai dares to ask for an exorbitant price, wouldn't he be afraid of losing his life to spend it? But now, no matter what, Jiang Hai had the initiative, so he also wanted to hear what Jiang Hai wanted. What I want is quite simple. First, I want our country's tour group to open an extra route to our town. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai made his first request. But when he heard Jiang Hai's words, the middle-aged man was stunned. What's the situation? Open a tour route? What kind of condition is this? Not to mention people at his level, even some cadres at the prefecture level, city level, as long as they are in charge of tourism, report to the higher-ups and ask for an extra tour route, and the higher-ups will approve it. Is there a need to trouble himself with this matter? It's like a person inviting another person to a meal. After arriving at a 5-star hotel, the other person said that a steamed bun and a glass of water would be enough. This made the person who invited the other person a little overwhelmed. Can't I? Seeing his appearance, Jiang Hai hesitated and asked. Logically speaking, he also knew that this matter shouldn't be difficult, but he must ask these people for help anyway because he wants to mess with the Yin family. But if he can solve the problem of Winthrop's tour route, it will be a good thing for Jiang Hai. Of course there's no problem. What other requirements do you have? Just say it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man immediately nodded and said, logically speaking, in a negotiation, even if it's easy to do, he will hesitate. Obviously it's not so easy to do. However, the middle-aged man didn't play any tricks on this matter. Although Jiang Hai didn't understand it now, it didn't mean that he wouldn't understand it in the future. If Jiang Hai knew that this matter wasn't so difficult to deal with after he left, it would be troublesome. The second thing is that I want to introduce some domestic animals. Seeing the middle-aged man agree to his first condition so readily, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Although he knows that this matter is not difficult, it's not too simple, right? When he was in Winthrop, Mayor Wallace almost went crazy because of the problem of tourists. Now he is still asking the Massachusetts government to increase the tour route. How can this matter be solved so easily when he is back in China? No problem except for pandas, golden monkeys and other species unique to our country, everything else is fine, even Siberian tigers and so on. As for plants, except for the mother plant of Dahongpo, everything else is fine, but the premise is that the United States has to accept it. Seeing Jiang Hai put forward the second condition, the man agreed without hesitation. This is also a very simple request. Even some of the forestry department directors of prefecture-level cities can make this decision, let alone people at their level. Listening to the other party agree to 2 consecutive requests, Jiang Hai was also a little confused. It seems that he thought too much at the beginning. Indeed, the country does not allow some locally preserved species to be brought out. But that is just a general request. If they really want to bring them out, it is not impossible. After all, some of the domestic plant and animal species have no advantage compared to foreign species. For example, the Ujimikan sheep that Jiang Hai had once eaten, which he had wholeheartedly wanted to bring abroad, was compared to the boar goat. Although its meat is more compact and delicious, the amount of meat produced is far less, and the scale can't be expanded because it is more aggressive. Coupled with the geographical conditions of breeding, it is destined that it is impossible to breed them on a large scale abroad. The reason why it is not allowed is to maintain the local livestock industry and maintain stability. If Jiang Hai wants to bring some out to raise, it doesn't matter, let alone people at their level. Except for national treasures that are not allowed, they think that everything else is fine. Using some animals in exchange for Jiang Hai's friendship is too worth it. Hearing the middle-aged man agree to his second condition so readily, Jiang Hai can't help but be a little speechless. In fact, before he mentioned it, he only had these 2 conditions. The first condition is to let him have a lot of money, and the second condition is to let him fill his stomach, especially after Xiaoyu moved into his manor recently. His love for food is getting stronger and stronger, but if he always eats Western food, there will be a time when he is tired of it. Chinese food is better. However, the seasoning for Chinese food is not ordinary. Now that he has the green light, he can make whatever he wants. Third, if something happens to me in the country, the imperial court has to come forward to help me settle it. However, Jiang Hai thought about it. Since the first 2 conditions are so easy, plus the in-families matter, Jiang Hai decided to add a protective talisman for himself. No problem. Hearing Jiang Hai's third condition, although he didn't know why Jiang Hai added this third condition, the other party still nodded. As long as Jiang Hai doesn't seek death, then they can protect Jiang Hai. It doesn't matter. These 3 conditions, in addition to the 3 conditions from the beginning, are all of my conditions. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai always felt that as long as he has these 3 conditions, it would be a bit of a loss, so he still said to him, "Okay." In fact, in this middle-aged man's view, among the 3 conditions of Jiang Hai, the first and second are nonsense. There is no need for him. The young man beside him can say anything. The only condition added is Jiang Hai's third condition. He doesn't even need to ask for permission from his superior. He can make the decision on the spot. In his view, Jiang Hai is still very patriotic. Originally, he thought that Jiang Hai would ask for a lot, but he didn't expect Jiang Hai to give such 3 conditions. This made him feel a little emotional. It seems that the imperial court's patriotism education is still very good. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know what he was thinking. In Jiang Hai's view, he got what he wanted. Winthrop opened a tourism route, so he has more money to earn. One must know that the villa area, shooting range and commercial street are all his territory. Introducing domestic animals and plants makes him even more happy. In the future, if he wants to drink good tea and eat good food, he doesn't need to look at old Master Zhang's face because he can also do it. The third condition is to protect himself under the condition that he doesn't betray the imperial court. This is very important. After the 6 conditions were finished, the two also signed a simple written contract. Of course, it can't be seen in public. If either party exposed this agreement, the agreement will be void, but it is useful to find it in private. This plate of sashimi was just a thin plate of fish, nothing more. What is this? Looking at the fish fillet in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some confusion. Unparalleled delicacy. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin smiled and directly picked up a piece with his hand. After dipping it in the sauce that had been prepared for him, he stuffed it into his mouth with a satisfied expression. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai also picked up a piece with his chopsticks, dipped it in some seasoning and put it into his mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, there was a fishy taste, which made Jiang Hai frown slightly. However, he didn't want to embarrass Du Feimin, so he gently took a bite. This bite made Jiang Hai's eyes light up instantly. The fish meat was like tendons. When Jiang Hai took a bite, not only did it have a bit of chewiness, which was very rare in fish meat, but this meat could be chewed in an instant after chewing. Every fiber of the fish meat would bounce against the teeth. This kind of texture would make people chew continuously subconsciously. Jiang Hai was the same. After chewing 3 times, the original fishy taste had completely disappeared, leaving only a fresh taste. Fresh, especially fresh. The fish meat was smooth, bouncy and a bit chewy. Even the abalones raised by Jiang Hai weren't as fresh as this. This made Jiang Hai extremely surprised. After eating 1 piece, he unexpectedly picked up his chopsticks and ate a second piece. Looking at Jiang Hai's satisfied expression, Du Feimin also smiled and started eating. Okay, let's eat. What kind of meat is this? Why is it so delicious? While chewing the fish meat in front of him, to be honest, although this meat was not as good as Jiang Hai's strongest beef in terms of fish meat, it was already better than any fish meat that Jiang Hai had ever eaten. This made him a little curious. Of course, if he was curious, he wouldn't just ask. He could introduce it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin stuffed the fish meat into his mouth and said with a smile, "This is a pufferfish." However, after hearing his words, Jiang Hai's chopsticks couldn't help but pause. As mentioned before, Jiang Hai was a timid person. He was very afraid of death. This game was poisonous. It was different from soaking in alcohol. If he wasn't careful, he would die from eating it. This made him a little confused. Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised expression, Du Feimin said with a smile, "Don't worry, the chef who made this has a professional license." Moreover, before the dish was served, he had already eaten it an hour in advance. If nothing happened, it would be served. Otherwise, do you think your court would let it go easily if someone here was poisoned to death? Indeed, if anything were to happen to any of the people present today, it would be a huge shock to the country. However, today Jiang Hai wanted to make it a shock. Of course, he didn't use this kind of fish meat. Achoo. At this time, Jiang Hai, who was eating Yangtze River grenadier fish, suddenly sneezed and then pinched his nose in confusion. Achoo. At this time, Jiang Hai, who was eating Yangtze River grenadier fish, suddenly sneezed and then pinched his nose in confusion. Have you caught a cold? Watching Jiang Hai, Qili, who was sitting beside him, couldn't help but ask in a low voice. To be honest, Qili was very happy at this banquet. Because Jiang Hai was sitting beside her, nobody dared to glance at her like a wolf like before, nobody dared to talk about her behind her back, not to mention find her trouble. How comfortable it was to have a man to rely on. Pitifully, she didn't know that before. Now that she thought about it, she was really too silly at that time. Now that she heard Jiang Hai sneeze, she asked anxiously as if a small cold was a serious illness. At this moment, she began to imagine Jiang Hai falling sick and lying on the bed. She would take care of him, wipe the juice on him, feed him medicine, and warm him up if he was too cold. Of course, it wouldn't be a normal warmth, but 2 people. No. But it was a pity that Jiang Hai wouldn't let her take care of him because he wouldn't fall sick at all. How could they fall sick when they were both at the limit of their bodies? Therefore, he was just a little confused. Why did he sneeze? Sir, did you add too much pepper? At this moment, the chef in front of him was stunned for a moment before asking. It's okay, this is the best flavor. Hearing the chef's words, Jiang Hai suddenly realized that it might be because of this. Jiang Hai looked at it and couldn't help but laugh. What kind of toy is this? This is still considered cheap. After all, this is just ordinary mahogany, not fine red sandalwood or yellow rosewood. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Minister Qin also laughed and said, "In recent years, the domestic wooden industry has been very popular. The so-called mahogany is not the same as what the average person knows. Mahogany is divided into two families, Leguminosae and Myrmecae. Leguminosae is divided into two subfamilies, Sphenoideae and Hematoxidae, which are further divided into the genera of red sandalwood, yellow sandalwood, and red bean. The Hematoxidae is the iron knife forest. The red sandalwood is divided into red sandalwood, the yellow sandalwood is divided into fragrant wood, black acid wood, and red acid wood. The Hematoxidae and the persimmon are divided into ebony and ebony. In short, if you don't play with these things, it is difficult to understand what these things are and what they represent. Even if they are all yellow rosewood, the price is very different. The price of South China Sea and South Asia Sea is different. There were a lot of twists and turns in this industry. Therefore, there was no fixed price for wood in the country. A piece of wood, you can sell it for 1 million yuan or 1 yuan, it depends on what the person thinks. Looking at the crazy furniture in China, Jiang Hai can't help but whisper, "Should I go back and get some trees?" Just as Jiang Hai and the others were wandering around, suddenly a figure entered Jiang Hai's sight. "It's him?" Looking at the swaying figure in front of him, Jiang Hai can't help but be surprised. When Jiang Hai looked at that person also saw Jiang Hai and couldn't help but smile. Obviously, he also recognized Jiang Hai.